Hello and welcome to another update. In this one I'll be covering the latest developments from the front line, where here we can see that there's a general trend over the past day or the past 24 hours that the Russian forces are now attacking on several parts of the front line. Since the last update, the Russian forces have started some attacks here to the Zaporizhzhia front, by the Donetsk front south of FDFA, by the Bakhmut front and the southern flank, and generally further attacks by the Kreminna area, as well as to the north by the Kupiansk and Svatove areas. So the Russian forces are now stepping up their own offensive capabilities here in these directions as they try to gain some territories that will allow them to, in the Zaporizhzhia front, withstand the Ukrainian offensive in a more steadfast way, and in the other parts to gain advantageous positions, as the Ukrainian forces here are also looking to advance themselves. So the Russian forces are trying to prepare some positions that the Ukrainians will be unable to push through. As for the Crimea fronts, here they are looking to prepare their positions for a possible battle of Lyman. So starting out in the Zaporizhzhia front, the Ukrainian forces continued their attacks here to the north of Robotyne, where a lot of fighting has been ongoing over the past 72 hours, past 3 days. And however, the latest reports from this part of the front line suggest that it is mostly silent now. There's only mainly artillery strikes between the two sides, but other than that, there's almost no fighting as of this morning. So essentially, we've seen a lot of fighting over the past 3 days, and the Ukrainian forces have managed to push a bit further, getting closer to Robotyne. However, they still have not entered the village. Fighting also continues by the Lubkova area as well as the Lyman area, where here the Russian forces have managed to counterattack the Ukrainian offensive and have managed to regain control over the hills here to the north of Marfopil, to the southeast of Lyman. And here, if we take a look at the topographic map, this is the area northeast of Marfopil, southeast of Lyman, that the Russian forces have managed to capture. This part right here, which is a highland of about 150 meters, which is about the same as the village here to the north. And then there's this rift in between them, this valley, which means that the Russian forces now have control over these hills, which will allow them to properly protect these villages here to the south, as well as have an overview over the offensive line from Lyman, and allow them to potentially attack the village here to the north, which will allow them, since they have adequate heights, to fight on the same elevation. So here we are seeing that based on the developments. Now, moving on to the Ramsky Ledge area, we see here that there is continuous fighting, especially by the villages of Staromayorske, Priutne and Uroshaine. However, there is no reports of any advances by the Ukrainian forces over the past 24 hours, which indicates that there is a lot of fighting on both sides, not just the Ukrainian attacking, but also the Russian forces possibly sending reinforcements to hold the line, or simply a lot of artillery being shelled at Ukrainian positions, which means that they have to prepare further before they launch further offensives in the direction of Priutne, Staromayorske and Uroshaine. However, according to the latest information, there is a lot of fighting, so the Ukrainian forces may see further advances soon in these areas as they are continuously pressuring the Russian forces here. Then we move on to the FDFA area, where here the Russian forces have managed to advance slightly here in the village of Pervomaiske, which is part of the village here. So this village spans in the area of this part right here. And then we have the village of Vodyane here. However, that is separate from this area. So the Ukrainian forces have been pushed back here, and the Russian forces have managed to control the whole area right here by the north of Vodyane and Pervomaiske. And they've also managed to capture this trench network here to the south of the village of Severne again. So the Russian forces managed to capture this a couple of months back. Then the Ukrainian forces launched a counterattack to regain it, and then the Russians have now captured it again. This is essentially the only reinforcements between the village of Vodyane and Severne, which indicates that now the Russian forces are able to attack the village of Severne. Moving on to the Kurdyumivka area, where here we see a video from Deep State Map where a Ukrainian drone flies to the north of Kurdyumivka and follows a Russian T-90M tank to this area right here. After which the T-90M tank was hit by artillery. The tank was hit by its engine compartment, which essentially disabled its engine. So it ends up being abandoned right here by a road junction after it crosses the rail lines. And then the crew disembarks from the vehicle and run in the direction of the village of FDFA here to the north. And then the drone drops further grenades down onto the tank to make sure that the Russian forces have a more difficult time repairing it once they retrieve it, since it's under their current control. Moving on to the Klishchiivka area, we see that the Russian forces have managed to capture this part here to the southwest of Klishchiivka. So the Ukrainian forces managed to advance in this bit, and then they have been pushed back again. So the Russian forces are really sending a lot of reinforcements to hold on to the village. As I've mentioned multiple times, this is a very important village for both the Russian and Ukrainian forces, because this is the difference between the Russians having control over the southern flank or not. Since all the way east from this, it is a lower elevation than Klishchiivka, and there's no proper fortifications other than the village of Klishchiivka. So if the Russians lose this village, then the Ukrainian forces will be able to attack straight to the villages of Zaitseve, Kudema, and all of these villages that the Russian forces were fighting over for a long time to the south of Bakhmut in the fall season of last year. We then move on to the northern flank of Bakhmut, where here the Ukrainian forces continue their attacks all over the front line as they try to push the Russian forces back. In the north, by Rostolivka and Vasyukivka, they attack in the direction of Soledar, and in the south, by Orehovo, Vasilivka and Berehivka, they are trying to gain control over the southern parts of the E40 highway, as well as moving northwards to connect with the northern flank. So essentially what they're looking to do is to gain control over Soledar, as well as attack from multiple directions to spread out the Russian forces and have a better chance at achieving their objective. So essentially the Ukrainian plan here in the Bakhmut area is a two-pronged attack. They want to cut off the supplies going in and out of the city, and for that they would have to gain control over the road junction right here, and that would essentially cut off all supplies in and out of the city. So to hold on to this, they would have to gain control over Soledar and Pokrovsk here to the south of Soledar, and they would also need to gain control over the southern flank. So the two main areas that the Ukrainian forces have as their focus in their offensive is Klishchiivka, Soledar and Pokrovsk. These three areas would essentially determine whether or not the Ukrainian forces will be able to launch a successful counteroffensive, or if they will fail, will be determined by these three areas. We then move on to the northern part, which is the Kreminna front, and here we see that the Russian forces continue their attacks. There are reported to be some Russian deep reconnaissance groupings to the village of Yampil, which is here to the southwest of Turske. This would indicate that the Russian forces are looking to launch some sort of offensive in the direction of Lyman. As we can see, the village here is very significant when it comes to the northern flank of Siversk. It also corresponds very well with the Russian control of Bakhmut. If the Russian forces have control over both Lyman and Bakhmut, then the Russian forces will be able to launch attacks both in the direction of Siversk, where they will have control over three parts of the front line, and also in the direction of Sloviansk, as they'll be able to attack it from two directions. They'll also be able to hold control of this whole area. So there's a lot of benefits to the Russian army if they manage to capture the village of Lyman. But we also have to look at it in the northern parts, where the whole southern part is filled with forests, heavy forests, and then the western part is filled with the Oskil River, which means that if the Russian forces manage to capture the Lyman village, then they'll be able to take control over this whole area north of Lyman, as the Ukrainian forces will be stuck between the Russian forces and the river line, and there is no retreat to them. They will have no main base. Their current main base is Lyman and Kupiansk. If they lose Lyman, then they would have to retreat to Kupiansk, and this is difficult for a lot of the forces, so they'll just have to retreat beyond the Oskil River line, or essentially the Russian forces will be able to launch an offensive where they cut off the Ukrainian escape to these areas, as they'll be able to just take control over the bottom and the top parts of the river line, and then just do a straight prone attack, but the Ukrainian forces will be unable to retreat. So in conclusion, while the Zaporizhzhia offensive is ongoing, The Russian forces are looking to gain beneficial positions here in the north. The Ukrainian forces are looking to gain control over the Bakhmut area, and the Russian forces continue their attacks to the southwest of FDFA. So generally there's a lot of movement elsewhere as well, on top of the ongoing Zaporizhzhia offensive. And that is all for this update. Thank you for watching and have a great day.